Hey everyone, and welcome to CoCast. In this episode, we're going to talk about what is co-creation. And with me is Rasmus. My name is Martin, and so I'll let you take it off, Rasmus. You set this topic, so let
Sure,
me know what you have in mind.
sure. Um, right. So, I mean, we we're building a company that is, where we're building a product to help people, actually achieve co-creation in their lives and work. And this co-cast is an experiment to have a co-created podcast. So, I guess within that context, it makes sense to sort of just talk about what co-creation is, to
Yeah,
sort of explore that. And I think it's one of those words that haven't really received a clear definition yet, in because you can sort of see everything from like Harvard Business Review articles around it, and then it's just about brands involving their customers in sort of having an input on their product lines. But there's also sort of the, I guess, Burning Man community where co-creation means something very specific there, and
mm,
then there's sort of the bridge from that to tools and work, where some companies, I saw Microsoft had one product launch where they sort of wrote co-creation or co-creators in one line. So yeah, I think let's dive into that and just
cool.
look at it, because I mean we might not have exactly the same definition either, even though I think we're quite close.
Yeah,
So I think could be fun to dive into. Right. I mean, so I think like the best way to start talking about something is to start talking about sort of the constituent parts. So if you look at co-creation, right, then you
mm,
have co and you have creation, and co is obviously together. So I think it makes sense to sort of talk about what creation is. And I think in order to talk about what creation is, it might be useful to talk about what it's not, to start with. So maybe I can
yeah.
bounce it back to you there, Martin. Like, what is not creation for you?
What is not creation? I think that's easy. When you create something valuable, that is creation. So anytime you are not creating value something valuable, then you're not engaging in creation. So you can so that's I guess post as opposed to destruction. If you do something, like, you can feel that I'm creating something, but if you're actually not producing value, then you're actually engaged in destruction, even if it might feel like creation. Like, you can have, I mean, and I'm talking now in a very philosophical sense. Like, if I'm uh, maybe I'm playing a computer game and I might learn from that, which is I might be learning things and actually building and growing as a person from the computer game. Then that is a creative thing to do. If value comes out of it, but if it's only procrastination, only the distraction from
Mm.
actually engaging in growing as a person, then it's destruction, a destruction of time, potential. So creating is an activity, any activity that where something valuable comes out.
Yeah, I think that's actually interesting. I was going to take it in another direction, so I'm happy I asked you first. But I think that's really interesting, because what comes out for me and what you say is actually that it's very deeply personal. Like, creation is very deeply personal, and destruction is very deeply personal. So I mean, for example, right? I always take like I've taken this example in many situations throughout my life, but like sometimes watching Netflix is sort of amazing, right? And you do it as a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a creative activity. You're there, you're really enjoying it, and then sometimes it's just clicking that extra episode because you don't want to go to bed, but you know you should, then you need to get up in the morning, and it's like, that destructive drive in me that makes me click that button, or I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
not click cancel when they autoplay it.
Yeah.
And I think that's like that it's deeply personal, at least for
Mm.
me, when I relate to what you're saying. It's not about the activity, it's almost about the intent
Mm.
of it.
And,
um,
and and now we're talking about creation and destruction as two opposites, but we're the examples that we're bringing up, like playing computer game and watching Netflix, are about consumption. And creation
Yeah.
and consumption can also be seen as two opposites.
Yeah.
But and I guess the reason why I brought up computer games is that it's a non-traditional activity that can actually be creative.
Mm.
But if you look at it, it also depends on the computer game, of course. When my kids play Minecraft, I see them being supremely creative because they produce something in the virtual world of Minecraft, which has value
Yeah, and
to
I think
them.
it's also like, and it's sort of interesting with like Minecraft example. I mean, I've never really played it to be honest, but I of course, I mean, know it and I watch stuff. But I think one of the interesting things, if we come back to definition creation, is kind of like that I'm creating something.
Hmm.
Like I am, there's something of me that's coming out in the output. So, for
Yeah.
example, in Minecraft, it's not like someone tells me what to build. I build stuff
Mm.
because I want
Mm.
to build it, and it's maybe my style of doing it. If I build a house, I will build it in a way that I think is fun or rewarding. And I think that's kind of like when I look at like day to day examples. We're just going to sort of rotate back, I guess a little bit to work and stuff. Is kind of if someone else or I write a task list, right, of stuff to do, and I just go into kind of completing them without actually being there and sort of adding myself to it, to the result, but just sort of getting it done. I think that's also like very clearly not being in creation, but almost being in, I don't know, like it relates to consumption. I would want to find a good word for this, but it's almost like just being in completion, just being in like getting it done, like in consuming, sort of not enjoying the food, but just getting it down your stomach,
Mm.
like
Mm.
putting it in you.
And now what I hear is that you're talking about presence, being present, or being
Sure,
aware, awareness or presence about the moment.
sure, sure. And I think it's interesting because I think this is where it comes back into kind of, I guess what we're like, working with building is kind of like how do you like bring yourself into what you're doing, whether it's privately, a computer game, or professionally, like in your work. So I mean, I can be. I mean, the task list is awesome. I really love having a task list because then I don't have to keep everything in my head. But then I can be in different modes of doing what I'm actually doing right now, and you know, I mean, everyone I think can relate to this. I mean, you're talking with someone, and sometimes you're like not really there, but you sort of just want to get to what you want to say, and maybe even get to the point where you just decide what you're going to do, so you can get on to the next thing. And sometimes you really enjoy talking to someone and actually, contributing and bringing out you in it. And I think that's
Mm.
true across the board. So like one of the things that I don't know, I think it's quite interesting with creation is that, and creativity is that I think people have a very narrow definition of it. Like just societally, there are creative classes. You even talk about
Mm.
the creative class, which do certain professions. Whereas when I'm
Mm.
talking about creation, it's much more of something that is applicable across the board. So you can be a carpenter or an administrator or a painter, and
Mm.
still be in creation. So it's much more of like a space where I'm sort of, yeah, like you said, present, but also like bringing out what I have to contribute, and sort of getting into like that. I guess I have something to contribute, which I think is a point that we're sort of have gotten into over the years as well a bit, Martin.
Mm. Definitely.
I
So
mean,
should
you
we move
used,
on to? Yeah, go ahead.
no, please.
Should we move on to uh, the part of
Yeah,
co-creation?
sure,
Yep.
sure. I mean, I think that's kind of, so just establishing the baseline, right? So creation is whenever I contribute and I like with something that is me, and add value, right?
Mm.
Which means I think that just to add to that definition is that I'm actually doing something that is meaningful for me. You might want to, if you simplify it, you might want to say that I want to do. The goal of what I'm doing, if you want to put it
Mm.
that way, the result I'm pursuing is something that is valuable to me.
Yeah.
And then if you take that then on the co, right, then it's of course now at least two people involved, or
Mm.
two teams, or two companies, or whatever. And they both have their kind of individual goals, what they want to do,
Mm.
like what's
Yeah.
important to them. And they have their unique skills or
Mm.
qualities, or, I mean, if you look at a company, resources that they can contribute, right?
Mm.
And then the question is then, how does that fit together? If you think about a team, right? I joined the team because of my reasons. You joined the team for your reasons, but the team has a goal.
Mm.
There's a job for the team. There's something the team is about. So I think that just on that simple level, it's like when there are common goals that allow the individual goals to exist, and where the individuals uh, are like allowed to be in creation, where there's space for them to be in creation, like we've been defining.
Mm. For me, it also has is very close to the idea of flow, or the state of flow. And I could go as far as like completely leaning on flow, if that is a well-defined thing, to say that co-creation is collaborative flow, like a collaborative
Sure.
state of
Yeah.
flow. And but I also think it's sort of cheating, because it's much better to talk about co-creation as something on its own. And if it's only about flow, then maybe co-flow would be a better word. Apart from it, doesn't sound really on point of anything.
No,
But
I mean,
how?
I think it's a good point though. Like if you go for like if you think about flow, I think
Mm,
flow is the state, right? It's a very important component in it. So I really like collaborative flow, but I would almost look at it as a constituent part, like
yeah,
of co-creation. Like it's not like it's necessary but not sufficient
yeah.
in one way, because
So
it
it's
doesn't cover a bunch of things.
that's the awareness or presence component. So co-creation would be um, an idea of a complete definition would be a collaborative state of presence where the combined activity of the people involved produce something valuable that comes from them, as like from their inner life, or trying to pick up on what you said before
Yeah,
about
sure.
that the value sort of comes from inside you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so interesting, because what I love about like this way of defining it is, of course, it's easier to relate to it as people. You
Mm,
think about this state of flow, right? You've all, like, everyone's been in it, I think, at some point, whether privately or professionally. And then you think about doing that together, and you think about whenever you've achieved something together in that state of flow,
mm,
and you were happy about the result, etc. So it was something that you both wanted, and it happened.
mm,
What's really cool with it, though, is that if you actually define it kind of strictly, like from first principles, like we have been doing today, and I think we can even like do it much more like succinctly. But if you just try to look at it something completely different, let's say you could even go for like a company or a country, right? You could, like,
mm,
if you just look at it like principally, there's no real difference whatever the type of entity. So if you take two countries, there can be an acknowledgement of what is important to the country, which is of course what it's important to the people, right? But if you just look at it that way, and then you can look at the country being in creation. Okay, there are things that are important to us, and we are pursuing them together,
mm,
right? Which is one of the hardest things in democracy, and we can get into that in another podcast of like where we are and where we might go. Um, and then there are, of course, things that are important to countries, right? And then there's the question of how, in a finite world, do we sort of allow those goals and find mutual goals that we can participate with globally, which is, of course, something that has been happening through like
mm.
supranational entities. But
Yeah.
but it's I think there's like a clear thing here, which is that I also want to actually take an opposition of co-creation versus competition. I think that's also like an interesting thing, because if two people are in creation but they're competing,
Yeah.
like so that is they're trying to basically not make the other achieve their goal,
Yeah.
which is of course awesome in sports and everything, right? I'm not saying competition should be banned, but it's definitely something um, that is in opposition if you're trying to achieve a co-creative flow.
Which is the point of this idea of finite versus infinite games, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like where a finite game is something where that has a winner and a loser, and an
Mm.
infinite game is a game where everybody does what is needed to just keep playing. That the to keep playing is the goal of everyone involved,
Mm.
and that all it's also like um, in its core the difference between competition versus perhaps flow or just
Mm.
an activity where you want to build on top of each other's work rather than
Mm.
um, surpassing the other actors involved
Yeah, no, I think that's
in
a really
some way.
good point. I mean, competition is by definition finite, right?
Yes.
You play a tennis tournament or a game, like,
Yeah.
you need to have an end, otherwise you can't declare a winner.
Mhm.
Um, so I really think that's that's also a shift of perspective that's really important and now these are probably topics we can dive into in individual podcasts, but um, yeah, I think like when you are in a state of co-creation, I think that actually relates to the task list I said before as well. It is an infinite perspective in that you're not trying to get it done. You're not trying to kind of close it. You're actually there, of course, getting stuff done, doing it
Mm.
together, having goals. But it's sort of a realization that even if you reach the goal you have currently, that's not the end of the game, right? You will continue to something new. So it's almost like co-creation needs to have a direction, which consists of goals, but the direction needs to be kind of infinite almost. Which is
Mm.
what I think like the really good companies that have been built, like global leaders, often have like visions and missions that are impossible in one sense. They're just a direction towards infinity, and then
Mm.
you keep going.
Something that is interesting about the community of countries, like the global community of countries, is that it's in a completely scientific sense, it's an anarchy. If you
Mm.
read because there's an anarchy literally means without leader. An arch of something like an archbishop is the
Mm.
leading bishop, and an archy is the opposite of a leader. So it's
Yeah.
something, and this is it was Henrik that gave me that definition of anarchy, and countries. There's no leading country in the world uh, that has a formal leadership of the others. It's an anarchy for good and bad. And so, what does leadership play for role? What role does leadership have in co-creation?
I actually think that's a really like a good point. So, and I wonder if it was Frederick Laloux with like reinventing organization who talked a lot about this. I've definitely read it in many places, but like the topic of self leadership. So, um, obviously we like the leaders are needed, right? We can't all be making every decision, and if we're gonna co-create, there needs to be leadership. So I
Mm.
think it's like a necessary but again, not sufficient requirement for co-creation is leadership. But I think the difference with co-creation, and I think this is like something where, I mean, for example, the Burning Man community is quite inspiring, is you're trying to get more leaders. So you're not trying to
Mm.
make fewer leaders, thinking about let's remove management layers, it's which is of course, good in many companies, but it's more about like how do we make everyone empowered as a leader of whatever they're doing. So that's kind of like, even if it's customer service representative, how do we give that person the autonomy to take leadership of whatever their kind of remit is, whatever their area of responsibility is. And this is something that's been proven. Zappos famously, gives a lot of autonomy to their customer service reps, and have been like, one of the most the companies with the most customer satisfaction. So I think like more leadership and self leadership. So it's like almost just like a pyramid of leaders. So if you take the countries, like you said, like co-creation on a country level would be, individual leadership. And then it would be, of course, because you're leading yourself. I mean, if you take you and me, like no one's going to brush my teeth. I need to lead myself to do that. But then it might be that, one country take leadership in one issue, right? Or one goal where another country follows, and another one in another thing. So I think that's about like finding, where common goals and individual goals align, and allowing leadership and kind of also then allowing the other side of leadership is if you lead something, then in that case, I'm a follower. I don't need to lead everything. It's not like leader is something that I need to be permanent with everything. I'm a leader in some things, and I'm not a leader in other things. And I think that's kind of a very important realization. Like when you have that co-creative flow, it's not hierarchical, but it is full of leadership. So it's almost like fluid hierarchy, where like all of a sudden I'm like, if you take that example, I'm the boss, and then I'm not in another thing. And that's great, because you can enjoy that, and it's a relaxation in that as well. Like some things I shouldn't lead because that's not where my competence is, and some things I'm very good at.
So it sounds like what you're getting at is that the factor of leadership, or leadership as a concept, should be as evenly distributed over the entire group of people co-creating as possible.
I don't know, actually. I don't know if that, because I always, this is kind of there's definitely value in what you're saying, but I don't want to limit it to it. So I would say the value in what you're saying is that trying to distribute leadership as much as possible. It's almost like in like a society trying to distribute opportunity as much as possible. But if you're trying to kind of ensure that everyone has exactly the same amount of money, well, we've seen that in kind of communism that didn't work very well. So I think that the perspective here is kind of like aiming for everyone to have the opportunity to take leadership, but not trying to kind of make sure that everyone has exactly the same say in everything, which is kind of the consensus culture, which is very, very inefficient management structure, or like even for just like well-being, like no one's happy being in those organizations that I've ever spoken to. Because it means that you need to have meetings about everything. You need to talk about everything all the time, and there's no decisions being made, and everyone's just frustrated. So I think it's almost like, giving the opportunity for leadership, but not trying to almost like, and it's also about not comparing leadership. Okay, let's say that you're the leader of a company, right? And I'm the leader of a part of that company. Are you more a leader than I am? I don't know. Like, are you? Oh, yeah, you're my leader in one sense, right? But you're not the leader for my team. Then I'm there. Like, you know what I mean? So, okay, so you have 7 people reporting to you, and I have 7 people reporting to me. Are you more of a lead? I don't know. Like, it's almost like removing ourselves from that. The hierarchy is the definition of value. Even though, of course, there are different competences needed at the different kind of levels, potentially. But I think it's almost like, encouraging leadership and enabling leadership, but not trying to kind of have an idea of what equal leadership should look like, and just like, being okay with having a leader in some things and being a leader in other things. So maybe.
Another topic that I've been thinking about this week, actually, regarding co-creation, is the concept of resonance. That when we co-create, what I do, if it ends up resonating with what you do, then we can both achieve a much higher output, or a higher value of the output in what we're doing. and that can be felt like the in the level of emotions that we experience together. Like if I'm vibrating of joy, or on a super high frequency, or I'm sad, super low
Mm.
frequent. If you start resonating with that, we can feel that sense of joy, or happiness, or sadness,
Mm.
building into much, like becoming much stronger. It's the same thing as when a violin is um, someone is playing a violin, and is it a bow and a string? What's the English word for what you're
Yeah,
holding?
I think it's
The
bonus string.
Yeah, the bow and the string together produces something resonating with each other, and that can be a strong resonance, or not. That happens in co-creation, where if there's a resonance, then the value of the output becomes much stronger.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So you took emotional as an example, but then you took the kind of very concrete example of the violin. And I think like just expanding on that, like if you just take the bow and the violin, right, as two, alive objects, let's just imagine they are like, hanging out. And then the bow goes to, whatever it's called, stroke the violin. And then there's music, if they interact in a good way. What just happened? Well, the violin, no, sorry, what do you call it? Sorry, I lost my word. It's like bow and
Resonance, bow and a
no, but the
string.
bow and string. Okay,
Yeah.
wait, which one is which? So the string is like
Well,
obviously the violin, and the bow is
yeah,
the thing
exactly.
that you use.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
right. So the bow goes and it stroke like it basically offers to stroke the string, right? And the
Yeah.
string
Yeah.
allows it. And then that
Yeah.
comes music. So I think it's
Yeah.
about giving and receiving. So resonance for me is when I'm actually open to receiving what you're giving. And if
Mm,
you take very concretely, take a discussion like this or whatever you want to call it, like if I'm not listening like to what you're saying and
mm,
responding to it,
mm,
which means that I'm not even though you are giving your words,
mm.
I'm not receiving them
Yeah.
and responding to it, there won't be co-creative flow. There
No.
won't be co-creation. It will
Yeah.
be as if we are having two monologues. And I think we all experience like sometimes when that happens,
Mm,
when you're talking like, and it's sort of like you're not even like in the same dimension. It's literally just two people talking from their own heads or,
yeah.
talking
Exactly.
heads.
And I was listening to a music performance 2 weeks ago where there was a violinist who was playing solo, who had an amazing control of the violin, where the tones she could produce was incredibly rich. Like it was so obvious that her way of playing produced um, just a soundscape that was out of this world. And
Mm.
I could pick up the same violin and produce, I guess, noise that would be and but even like an experienced violinist, um, that can produce really good, clear tones, might not achieve her level in just playing a single note. And that was completely blew my mind, the control she had over just the touch of between the bow and the string. And um, but can co-creation happen with an inanimate object? Was she co-creating with the violin at that moment, or is that co-creation?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think I don't know. It just depends on the definition because I think it sort of makes more sense to define that as being in creation because it sort of dilutes the concept. But yes, I mean, I would say in its essence, life is a co-creative process. I am
Mm,
co-creating with everything around me, whether that's alive or not. I'm participating in what's around me. So I think that comes back to participation. So I would rather say she's participating with
mm,
the violin, like of the the creative process of playing the violin. But I would probably limit just for ease of use co-creation to kind of multiple alive or I don't know multiple. yeah, let's call it living entities. I would even
Mm,
say that
mm,
companies and countries are living organisms,
mm,
whereas I would probably not say that a violin is a living organism because it
mm,
doesn't move
mm.
or change on its own. But I
Maybe
think
the
there's another.
violinist,
Oh,
maybe
go on.
she's co-creating with the creator of the violin. Whoever created that violin is part of
Yeah,
producing the final output.
that I would say. Yeah, definitely,
Mm,
definitely, and that's kind of
yeah.
like I don't know, sort of like indirect co-creation also,
Mm,
which is something that I think is coming into awareness. Like economists call this externalities,
mm,
which means that there are effects of what I do that are not direct, right?
mm,
But
yeah.
anyhow, that's probably another topic. But I think there's one other thing that you mentioned that is really interesting that I want to pick out, which is like the role of competence or skill in
Mm,
co-creation,
mm,
which is that you know it's easy to sort of say, hey, like flow as something that's just a feeling, just a state, and not dependent on anything. But I mean, if you look at top people from sports to the arts to I don't know, computer programmer, there's a lot of skill that has been learned that enables you to be in flow as well.
mm,
So I think that's kind of like being a master of whatever you're doing, like being really, really good at it, or at least mastering it to a level where you can not think about everything, right? But just actually move with it intuitively.
mm.
I think that's something that is not to be forgotten if you want to have actually good results from co-creation and you want to sort of achieve the flow state. Then you need to be good at what you do, like
Mm.
and
And and
continuously learn to do
and that
that.
also comes back to what we talked about before with leadership and self leadership.
Mm,
Where you have more experience is also the areas where you can take a stronger leadership in the entire co-creation process. And in the best case, everybody involved brings different pieces to the puzzle rather than being uh, homogeneous. Like everybody has
mm,
a different aspect of what you're doing, bring
mm,
different skills, and the output still resonates with everyone, so that everybody is elevating
mm.
their output to a higher level than they would on their own.
Yeah, that's. I think that's. I don't know. I think that's also for when we maybe can get Frederick Laloux on this podcast or something. But I think it was in Reinventing Organizations he spoke about like different types of hierarchies, and that a very healthy form of hierarchy is a wisdom hierarchy or like a competence hierarchy. I don't know which word he used, but it basically means that yeah, I mean it's like having having a coach. Like if I want to learn to golf, it's good to sort of take a few lessons
Yeah.
because I'm not going to figure it out on my own, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to get a good swing on my own, really,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to be able to have flow on the golf course without having some level of competency because the ball will not even be on the fairway; it will be in the forest. So um, yeah, no, I think it's a very good point that like leadership also in co-creation is almost like it's earned. It's like it's
Mm.
earned with competence, and it's not sort of and it's evaluated based on sort of results and efficacy, which is like competence. So I think yeah, that's something we should maybe dive into another time. I haven't really thought about
Mm.
that much, but it rings true for me at least.
Yeah. I think it's time to round off.
Yeah,
This
me
has been
too.
a super exciting
Yeah,
conversation. Thank you so much, Rasmus.
thanks, Martin, and yeah, looking forward to do this next week.
Yeah, cool. Thanks everybody tuning in. And if you have comments or ideas about future topics, let us know. And have a nice, good co-creation flow until next time.